So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter for today's webinar, Robin Schooling. Robin is the managing director of Silver Zebras and one of my favorite HR people of all time. So if you follow Robin on Twitter or you've connected with her on Facebook, you know she brings a really special spin to every HR topic because she's smart, she's witty, and I should stop talking about her so she can talk to you. All right, Robin, let's get this party started.
Hey, that's fine, and I actually I did like the badass introduction because I have a Recruiting Daily Badass Blogger T-shirt, so that's even cooler. Yep. Well, glad everybody joined us today. This is a topic that I think I find infinitely fascinating and have for years, and it's the disconnect, the conversations that we have around HR versus recruiting, and how do we get along, and do we get along, and what can we do to get along better? And I think I find it interesting because I've worked really through all of these different areas. I started years ago in an agency as an assistant. I wasn't actually doing recruiting myself, but that sort of gave me my taste. And then I went on and I've worked in-house HR roles. I've been a manager, a director, a VP. I've been a HR business partner. I've certainly been a peon in HR. And even as an HR generalist or an HR recruiter leader, or an HR leader, I had responsibilities, of course, for oversight of recruiting. And that often means when overseeing the entire HR function that I had a staff or myself who were dealing with, FMLA notices and benefit enrollment in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we were spending 4 hours interviewing candidates for customer service positions. I've also, over the course of my career, worked in-house recruiting positions, managing my own varying requisition loads. But I've also been an in-house recruiting leader where I had a team of talent acquisition folks who handled sourcing and recruiting and some of the related aspects of onboarding. And the thing that I have found interesting, let me tell you this, that every single time that I flipped from the HR side back to in-house recruiting, I literally stopped understanding what the hell HR was doing and what HR was getting at. And I may have worked in HR proper for the previous 5 years, but within the span of the first 60 days in that recruiting role, I started to once again wonder what HR was doing and started to consider them this giant human roadblock. And as an in-house recruiter, would sit and sort of ask these questions, why can't we have access to certain data or information? Why do they in HR treat those of us in recruiting, we're part of their team, why do they treat us as second-class citizens? And, why in the world, to boil it all down, does HR do what it does? And then inevitably, I would go back to an HR role somewhere, and once again, it would all make perfect sense. And that's just talking that disconnect in-house, HR and in-house recruiting. What about that poor, beleaguered third-party or agency recruiter, which is really who we're here to talk to about today? So as a third-party recruiter, your primary contact may in fact be the hiring manager that you're working with, but you still have to build a mutually beneficial, satisfactory, ongoing relationship, one that has trust and respect. You have to build that relationship with your HR team. And I think it's important to remember that relationship can be the start of something really beautiful. Contrary to popular opinion, all of us in HR are really not all that bad. We are folks focused on the same thing that you as a third-party recruiter are focused on, that's getting the right people in the right jobs. And HR professionals will view that third-party recruiter as a valued partner when everybody kind of takes a positive and a proactive approach to building and nurturing that relationship, that friendship. And so while that HR director, that HR lady that you have to deal with may appear to be kind of this soulless bureaucrat, someone who's just, burning to have control of every aspect of the candidate flow and the hiring process. It really doesn't have to be that way. And so today, what I want to talk about is why things often feel as if they're at an impasse with HR, discuss how you can win over that HR team or that HR leader, and then a few simple things to keep in mind as you go about building successful and sustainable relationships with your neighborhood HR lady, with your neighborhood HR professional. So let's dive right in and take a look and think about HR. Because while you may get the feeling that HR professional does not like you, that's really not the issue. The reality is she doesn't understand you. Most, not all, but a fair number of HR professionals come into the field as generalists. So they're handling a variety of things. And when they think of recruiting, they think of it from a very transactional staffing workflow model. If it's an HR generalist and she's a member of SHRM and that's where she's getting her information, she really has not gone in and sort of specialized in some of the hardcore, for want of a better word, sourcing and recruiting and the types of things that you're doing as an agency recruiter. So she doesn't understand you. But what does she really think about you? Well, there's a couple of things she may think. The first is she may just think that you're trying to dazzle her with a bunch of bullshit. She doesn't understand the words that you're using, the concepts that you're talking about, because for the most part, she hasn't been exposed to them, or she hasn't had the time or the inclination to really understand them. So a third-party recruiter coming in and throwing around jargon and buzzwords in an attempt to sound important really comes across as someone who's just trying to dazzle, all flash and no substance. So that's often the broad brush that third-party agency recruiters are painted with. The other sort of underlying issue, why there's a lot of misunderstanding, is that the typical HR professional is afraid, perhaps just a little bit, that you're going to show her up. She doesn't want to appear incompetent or weak or unable to do what she's been hired to do. This is particularly true when it's someone who's new to the role. And, I think about this often where there's a new HR leader at a local organization, and everybody knows about it. It's in the paper. Word gets out on the street that Sally Sue has gone in as the new HR director, and she's inundated, of course, with calls from everybody, but certainly with calls from third-party recruiters. And that HR leader who's new to her role has been expressly hired and through that interview process has been told that she's responsible, she's in charge, she's tasked with recruiting, staffing, hiring, whatever the needs are of that organization. So she's a little bit reluctant to have somebody come in and show her up. She's of the belief that it's not just her responsibility to see that these things get done, but sometimes that she really has to be the one to do them. So that's a factor that often plays into the perception that HR professionals will have of third-party recruiters. They're coming in to show me up. Another issue, and this is a reality across a variety of realms. It's not just focused on folks who work in recruiting, but let's face it, sometimes third-party recruiters come off as a little bit too salesy. At that last SHRM chapter meeting or the local chamber's wine and cheese networking event, all you seemed to do was want to hand out your business card and get her contact information. And quite often, that HR professional goes home from a conference or a luncheon or whatever it may be, and within 2 hours, she has an email, she has a follow-up phone call, and she has that colleague that she thought was perhaps a resource trying to get in, set up an appointment, and get her business. And so there's this whiff of salesmanship that becomes just a little too unnerving to many HR professionals. They just don't want to deal with that. And finally, it's a little bit about losing control. So your HR director that you're dealing with may love 50 Shades of Grey, and she's got a ear-worn copy, and she's shared it with all her friends, and she reads it over and over again, but she doesn't want to lose control at work. And so sometimes the thought process that she has is, if I bring a third-party agency recruiter into this world that I'm in charge of, I'm going to lose control. I'm going to lose control of the process. I'm going to lose control of the outcomes, and I'm really not going to have the level of authority and responsibility that I want. Those are some of the common reluctances, I guess, that I see from HR professionals. Why they're reluctant to enter into conversations with third-party recruiters in the first place. So understanding that HR professional is one thing, but you know what? We still want to win them over because it's good for the organization, potentially, if they work with a third-party recruiter, and it's certainly good for that HR professional for a variety of reasons. So how do you go out and go about really setting up that relationship? It's kind of like playing a game. You can tell my age, right, by the slides that I use. This is, of course, Meatloaf from back in the day, but it really is like playing a game of baseball. And the goal is to start at the beginning, run the bases, and bring that relationship on home. So how do you go about doing that? How can you start to win over that HR professional, that HR lady that you're working with? Well, the first thing to do is start by playing ball, and play ball by understanding her world. Understand the company that she works for. Research it, which goes without saying, but also find out a little bit about her. It's surprising to me. It really is how few agency recruiters bother, take the time to do this before calling into an organization. So find out what that company does, what their history is, what they are looking for, the type of growth projections that they have. It's not just a matter of kind of doing these blanketed cold calls without an understanding of what's going on at that organization. And do a little more research so that, again, that initial contact can be very well informed. Find out as much as you can about that HR leader's job and role. Who's responsible for what? Find out that information. What's the function of this person that you're talking to? What does the rest of the team do? See how much of that information you can gather, so that when you call into the organization or you have that first introduction, you're coming from a point of knowledge. The more informed you are, the better it will be. And here's sort of a tip, and I would hope that a lot of people do this. If your primary contact, your sole contact perhaps, is the hiring manager, let's imagine that that hiring manager has full discretion, full budget authority to handle contracting with you to fill that job order. They're running their own ship. They can do what they want. Even if that hiring manager is your primary point of contact or your sole point of contact, they've contacted you or you've contacted them, I would still suggest that you ask to be introduced to the HR leader. You may not have to work with that person throughout the process, but as we're going to cover in a little bit, there are ways that you can use that relationship to your advantage, and reasons that you want to have that kickoff introduction to the HR person, even if you're kind of praising Jesus because HR doesn't have to be involved. it's still a good idea to get that introduction, find out who it is, and reach out to that HR professional. So that's kind of the first step. Now, as we continue playing the game to win over the HR lady, I want you to start showing some care and compassion. Really start to dive into formulating a little more solid relationship. Find out through conversations what her goals and aspirations are. Now, this can go either way. She may have been the one that reached out to you, or the hiring manager may have, or you called into the organization and that's how you got that job order, got that requisition. But dive into this and learn from the HR leader what the goals are. Why are they working, perhaps for one of the few times, with a third-party recruiter? Is it a matter of time that they really need to fill a particular position quickly? Is it because this specific hiring manager perhaps has enough money in his or her budget and is able to do that on their own? Or perhaps the HR leader or the in-house recruiter realizes that this particular search is beyond her normal recruiting know-how. So find out what she aspires to. Is it to lower cost? Is it to get better quality? Is it speed? Is it finding reliable group of candidates? Whatever those aspirations are, find out why you're being used in the first place. As another part of that, you want to also clarify, again, from HR, what her pain points are. What are the pressures that she's under? Because again, while you may be working directly with that hiring manager, and that's who you're ultimately looking to satisfy with this particular, a particular search, HR still has some pain. They feel some pressure coming from above or below or next to them. So what is that? Is it that she's looking for a shorter time to fill? They have too many open positions at one time, and she's hearing the squeeze on that. Is there a critical role that needs to be filled, or several critical roles that need to be filled to drive, let's say, business growth or some new initiatives that are being worked on? Find out what those pain points are and start to really develop that understanding of that. And as part of that exploration, you also want to get a sense for her past experiences. We talked about why sometimes HR folks don't feel a whole lot of affinity and love for agency recruiters. But why is that? Perhaps she had some past experiences that did not go well. Now, this is not the chance to go in and gather gossip about, a competing agency recruiter or something, but this is to really understand what did not work necessarily well in the past when they went outside and used an agency recruiter. So get a sense of past experiences from that. Because really, at the end of the day, what you're doing for HR, just as you're doing for that hiring manager, is you are finding out what's most valuable to her and helping her solve those business problems. That's really the key. So she may have different overall priorities than that hiring manager has, but those are also critical to really strengthening the relationship. Now, there's a bonus in all of this and taking the time to do this, because that HR professional really can be your ally, doesn't need to be your enemy. And it's just like any other relationship, taking the time to kind of nurture it and lay this foundation, but she can be your ally. And one example of that might be, in a particular organization, the HR director may be the one who's written the job descriptions, or she's the one that any sort of revamped job descriptions or changed requisitions need to go through. So if she can be your ally, that could be a plus for you. Imagine having that hiring manager that, who has just these unrealistic expectations of skill sets or experiences that they're looking to hire, and you just know that's an impossible to fill position the way that it's written. if you have this relationship with the HR leader and can have that conversation, she can also be an ally in that fight. She can be someone who internally is talking to that hiring manager and helping them rethink what they need and helping them restructure that position. So that's a plus when you've spent time really nurturing that relationship. So we continue on through the game here, and you've gotten to know the HR lady a little bit more. Now you need to let her know about yourself as well. What makes you special? Why are you the agency recruiter that she should think of and want to work with, certainly now, but also in the future? Don't sugarcoat things. Be real, be human. Help her understand, though, what makes you a unique partner to work with her. So part of that becomes not giving her BS, not dazzling her with that BS that she may be accustomed to. Don't go in and tell her that you have the most fantastic candidate database of anybody out there, when in reality she has the same database because it's called Google and LinkedIn. You're just lucky she doesn't know how to necessarily use it. But don't dazzle her with bullshit. Again, come in and tell her what makes you unique. But part of your role in that becomes educating and informing her. That's a piece that's often missing in the process. So take the time to explain your process. How do you source candidates? What's your recruiting process? How are you having conversations with candidates? What does that look like for you? And let her know about that. If I'm the HR leader and I'm hiring you to do something, essentially, because I don't either have the time, skills, or inclination to do it, I want to hear what you're doing. So I do want to get that information. Don't come in and just tell me things that aren't real. Probably one of the worst things that I've seen locally here lately where I am is some organizations will partner with multiple agency recruiters at one time to work the same position. And so I have seen one position put out on the exact same job boards by about 12 different agency recruiters. And I often wonder if that HR team, if that in-house HR team is even aware that that's happening. And it just, shows to me that none of these agency recruiters are necessarily special. So who's going to ultimately win at that? How are they going to stand out? I think that's a good story to think about not spinning in a bad way, but a good story to tell that HR professional so they understand how you operate. And as part of that educating and informing, think about giving her some stories and giving her some statistics. If we look at what makes you special, as opposed to the other agency recruiters that she could be working with, think about what's unique. Are you a master negotiator? Are you, just superb at closing candidates? Have you had successes closing difficult candidates? And come in armed with a few of those stories, perhaps a few of those statistics to kind of illustrate why you're unique, why you're special. So it's really knowing yourself and being able to tell the HR lady, what does your agency or what do you as an individual recruiter bring to the relationship? So that's the third step in really, building that relationship and starting to win her heart and win her mind. And the fourth, to bring it on home, how do you get it all together, is really remembering that you shall always respect the process. Don't go around the process. I mean, we talk about it all the time. I work in HR and I talk about don't deal with HR if you don't have to. But the reality is the quickest way to lose the relationship is by not respecting the process. It may be easier, you may think in your mind, to kind of do the end around and not follow the steps, but don't do it. So as an example, if your primary relationship, your primary point of contact is with the hiring manager, once you talk to HR, if that HR professional tells you that she must first talk to all candidates, don't cut her out. Make sure that she's part of whatever process she tells you she needs to be a part of. And there may be reasons for this, and ideally you're going to get those clarified. You're going to want to ask, what's the purpose? How can I make it as easy as possible for the candidate? Yes, I understand, Sally Sue, HR lady, if you need to talk to everybody, but get some understanding from her as well, because HR is not in there just because they feel they need to control things. There's often a well thought out reason behind why that HR professional is involved in that process. So HR may insist screening all the candidates or having that first phone conversation or those first interviews because they do things like evaluate cultural fit from an overall organizational standpoint. HR may ask some general screening questions. HR explains benefits, or they provide some high overarching job details or organizational details or company goals and strategies. Those are the things that may all be happening before that candidate moves on to the hiring manager. So make sure to respect that process that HR has told you need to follow. There may be compliance reasons for it, and while we sometimes give HR grief and give ourselves grief if we work in HR for being slaves to the process and insisting on treating everybody the same and not deviating from that, there are often very sound reasons for it, and it's important that you pay attention to that as well, so that again, there's sort of that trust and that respect, and that HR gets the fact that you truly want to be a partner. So that's how we start building the relationship, the tips, the things to start paying attention to. But then how do we sustain that? Because this may very well be a one-night stand, and we want to turn it into a long-term relationship, something that will garner more business from the side that you're sitting on, and something that's going to be really a benefit to the HR team when they have a successful agency relationship where they can call somebody up when they have a hard to fill position. So that's our goal. That's really everybody's goal. So how do we start turning it from just this hookup to a long-term relationship? The HR team, that HR director, that HR professional that you're dealing with thinks she's fabulous. And she wants you to think she's fabulous too. It may not seem like it, but she really does. So you have a mission to accomplish here. And there are a couple of things that you want to focus on as you move forward, how to make this a long-term relationship. So the first thing is you want to make sure that HR provides you with cultural context, information about the company culture. Again, if you're primarily dealing with the hiring manager, you're going to get a very narrow understanding of the organizational culture, the work environment, and certainly that's important because you want to understand what it's like to work on that team or for that manager. But HR can provide valuable information that your candidate is going to want to know about the overall organization. What are the traditions? What are the norms? What are the behaviors? What are the unique peculiarities that pertain across the organization that hiring manager may not be aware of, may not think is important? So gathering that information from HR is one part of your mission. You want to make sure that HR gives that to you. You also want to make sure that HR ensures an unbiased approach to screening. And this can take several iterations, again, depending upon the process and how that particular company wants to work, but making sure that all of your candidates are treated appropriately, that have equal access to the process, whatever that may take. So think about, kind of the typical old school way of submitting candidates. And I'm thinking back to when, especially on fax machines, but certainly even now if we scan and send resumes, where we remove all that personal identifying information from the resume and just put the stamp, here's the recruiter's contact information or the agency's contact information, and submit the candidate that way, because we're trying to some degree to remove some bias. We don't want them necessarily contacting the candidate, but we also want to remove some bias. So try to find out from the HR team what other sorts of biases may or may not exist. Are there some things historically in place of, we just have never really considered candidates from ABC company to come work for us, and there may be this sort of cultural context around the types of biases that exist. So you want to explore that, have those conversations, and really try to drive that HR team and then ultimately the hiring managers to be unbiased when they are screening and looking initially at your candidates. You also want to ensure that your HR contact shares access with decision makers. Again, this is going to be dependent upon how you're working within the organization, because yes, again, you may be primarily working with the hiring manager, but there are also situations where you're not working with the hiring manager at all. Perhaps HR has contacted you directly, or you've contacted HR, and HR is the only point of contact. So in that scenario, we want to kind of flip it from what we've already been talking about, and you want to make sure that HR contact is sharing access to the hiring manager. I worked at one organization where we did not use third-party recruiters a lot, but periodically we did. And it was really managed through HR. They were fairly generic positions. We were able to, it was just a matter of time and saving time up for the HR team to kind of work with an agency for this. So I would contact the agency. They would source, they would screen, they would recruit, and those candidates would flow into HR first. And so we would do the screening and an initial call, initial interview with those agency candidates before passing them on to the hiring manager, who obviously ultimately made the hiring decision. The key here was, though, that in HR, we weren't the only people having the conversation with the recruiter. We made sure that recruiter had access to the hiring manager. That follow-up after the interview with the hiring manager was done directly between the agency recruiter and the hiring manager. That's where HR really stepped out of the process. So we wanted to make sure that those recruiters, that third-party recruiter had access to the decision maker to really get feedback, kind of talk some final steps and next steps as well. The fourth thing that you want to make sure that's part of your mission is making sure that HR contact is skilled at problem resolution. You want to make sure that if anything arises where issues go back and forth, let's say between yourself and the hiring manager, you want to make sure that HR leader is able to come in and resolve those issues. And sometimes that becomes as simple as having the ability to light a fire under those hiring managers. This is probably one of the best things that you can rely on your HR partner to do, because you've all, I'm sure been there. Hurry up, I need candidates, I need to fill this position. That's the hiring manager saying that. You submit a number of candidates, and then you sit and wait. And you know that the interviews have happened, but for some reason that hiring manager is just sitting there. If you have a strong relationship with that in-house HR person, they can be a valuable tool to help spur on activity, spur on action from the hiring manager. And sometimes it's just a matter of them, walking down the hall and having that conversation, peer-to-peer, colleague to colleague, something that they can do better than you can do calling in from the outside. So a really valuable, thing that can arise when you have a good working relationship with that HR professional in the organization. And the key to remember in all of this is that HR's job is not to do everything, but HR's job is to make sure everything gets done. Because that HR leader, that in-house recruiter, they are just as vested in getting the correct candidate placed as you are, especially if it's your candidate. So they are there to make sure everything gets done. And that's how you really need to approach this entire relationship. And so how do you keep it going? How do you keep that romance alive? Well, sometimes it's as easy as picking up the phone and give her a call. Not just when you're working on an open requisition, not when you're just looking to see if she has any hiring needs or trolling for new business, looking for referrals, whatever it may be. Pick up the phone, be human, have a conversation. Better yet, take her to lunch. HR ladies love to go to lunch. So keep that relationship going throughout the year. You may get one piece of business from that company in a given year, but that relationship should be nurtured constantly, all throughout the year. The other thing to keep in mind is that your role is also to educate. We kind of talked about this before, but approach that relationship all year long as one where you are also her teacher. You're the teacher of HR. So as an example, if there may be an HR process that just seems ridiculous and or very slow to you. You just want to get your candidate in, get them in front of the hiring manager, and worry about getting this online application filled out later. And HR professionals are very proud of sort of adopting the mantra, if someone wants to work here bad enough, they'll take the time to fill out our 45-minute application. So those sorts of processes are the types of things that you can see very clearly. So this is your opportunity to educate and to inform, and not in a denigrating way, not in a way that comes across as if you're picking on the process that perhaps she's designed or the workflow that she has, but you're coming in as the expert. You are the recruiting expert. And so things that you can think about sharing with her might be, market data or candidate data, the things that the average HR professional is not out looking at or reading. So how can you help her improve that cumbersome application process? Because it affected your candidate, and it's certainly going to affect other candidates. So think about sharing, the research from the Candies, the Candidate Experience Awards. Give her information like that. Talk to her about what other organizations are doing in sort of a general sense. Ask her if she is exploring ways to determine the effectiveness of her own career site. Is she looking at the number of candidates that drop off, and, not giving her the how-tos necessarily, but pointing her in the right direction, not in a dazzling with buzzwords sort of way, but truly in an educational and informative way. That's sort of a win-win relationship thing right there. On the flip side, HR can also teach you some things. And I think this is one of the most valuable things that you can learn from HR. And it certainly comes into play when you're working to fill a specific position. When you have a specific job order, specific requisition that you're working on, this is why it's critical to have that relationship and to be able to talk to HR about these things. And I like to call these the non-negotiables, because quite often the hiring manager may have provided information that's not entirely accurate. You may go into this thinking, well, the hiring manager has the budget, has the authority, has the ability to hire. That's who I'm dealing with. So when the hiring manager tells me, oh, of course we can negotiate for additional PTO, or, oh, yes, of course we cover relocation, or whatever other sorts of issues may arise, you need to get clarity from that HR professional early on in the process about what those non-negotiables are. It's entirely possible that the company will not, cannot, just won't budge on allowing an additional week of PTO, or the relocation package that the hiring manager alluded to may not be available or may not be at the amount that the hiring manager said it would be. So having those conversations up front, the best place to go, the best person to have that conversation with and to get that information from is from HR, because the last thing you want is to be sitting at the end of the day trying to negotiate a placement, trying to close the deal to get your candidate on board, and the deal breaker ends up being PTO that they thought they would get that they're not going to get. So really find out what those non-negotiables are. And that could be, again, anything from benefits to flexible work, anything that's important to the candidate. HR is really the one to talk to about that. And the other thing that HR can teach you, the give and take in this relationship, is learning from them what the primary methods of communication should be or work best within the organization. Now, you may get preferences from that hiring manager, but you also want to, again, understand how HR wants to be communicated with, because, again, they're your partner in this. And so clarify that up front. Learn from HR to what extent they want to be involved. They may have nothing to do and have no involvement in the actual interview process, but perhaps they just want to be in the loop. And so that could be something as simple as, sending that HR director an email, just alerting her to the fact that, hiring manager Joe has 3 candidates coming in for an interview next Wednesday. But finding out and learning from HR how communication works within the organization is another kind of winning piece of this relationship puzzle. So it truly is a matter of building relationships, keeping it alive by kind of nurturing and sharing information and really, I think, sharing the love a little bit. I mean, it really can be a wonderful thing. Get to know your HR partner, get to know them, nurture that relationship, and it can be not a roadblock. It really can be a beautiful friendship.